Okay, hi everybody. This is Mr. Manning, and this video is going to be an introduction to our third unit. The unit's going to be about banking, like different types of banks. It's also going to be about different kinds of investments, and then probably one of the biggest parts of this unit is going to be about checking accounts and how to maintain a checking account. What are some of the positives and negatives, and so on. So this particular video is going to be about checking accounts. Most of the things from this video are going to be 2.0 kinds of items on your summative, but it's really good info to know because most people do have a checking account, and for a lot of people they use it, for their debit card or for paying bills online, those kinds of things. But it's still an important thing to have. So we're going to talk a little bit about checking accounts. So first of all, what is a checking account? Where do you get it? Most banks, that you see around town and everything will offer a checking account. Not all of them are free. Most of them are, but not all of them are. So when you're looking into getting a checking account, one of the things that I would recommend is probably making sure that it is free. There's really no reason to pay for a checking account if other banks offer it for free. What are some of the benefits of having a checking account? Well, one of the main things is it helps you manage your money. Checking accounts allows you to keep track of how much money you're spending. Um, you will have access to the bank's website, which will record all of your transactions for you. You can also pay for things in different ways, such as using a debit card, paying online, writing a check itself. It just makes it a little bit easier. And then, in fact, also having a checking account really makes it so you don't have to carry very much cash. My wife and I actually do not carry cash hardly at all. We generally pay for things with our debit card or pay for them using online banking. All right, so how do they work? Well, like I said earlier, you can pay for things using these three methods: writing a check, using a debit card, or electronic banking. Now, one thing that you need to be concerned about when you have a checking account is spending too much money. Checking accounts can be a little tricky because if you don't have the money right in front of you, sometimes it's easy to lose track of how much you're spending. So one thing we need to talk about is what it is bouncing a check, or what does that actually mean? And this term is a little outdated because a lot of people don't write checks anymore. Basically what it is if you spend more money than you have in your account. They used to call that bouncing a check, but since people don't write checks very much anymore, you might hear someone say that you've overdrafted your account or that you had insufficient funds. Those are some terms that banks like to use. Now, the reason this is bad, one of the main reasons is your bank is probably going to charge you a fee. If you write a check or use your debit card when you don't have enough money, they're going to charge you a fee. I know my bank, it's like $35 every time you do it. So it can get really expensive really fast. So you want to be super careful. And then also, if you do this a lot, it can hurt your credit score. And credit is something we're going to talk about in our fifth and final unit in this class. But your credit score is something that's very important to you in your future. And you do not want to do anything to mess up your credit score. So bouncing a check can definitely do that. Okay, so what are some key words or things you need to know for checking accounts? Well, the first one is the register. And the register is basically just a place that you keep track of all of your transactions. So a transaction would be any time that you receive money or anytime you spend money. So with a checking account, there's a lot of ways to spend money. We've already said that you can write a check, you can swipe your debit card, you can buy something online, and so on. And whenever you receive money and you want to put money into that account, you usually have to go to the bank and make a deposit. You can actually go to the ATM to do this, or you can go inside the bank and use the teller. Or even some banks have an app that allows you to actually just take a picture of the check, which is really cool and super convenient. So if your bank allows you to do that, that would also be really good. But whenever you do these things, you record them in the check register, and that allows you to keep track of how much money you actually have in your account. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, I can log into my bank's app, or I can go online and look anytime I want. And a lot of times that works pretty good. But here's one problem. Sometimes the bank is either kind of slow about updating their information, or they don't know that you've done something. So, for instance, let's say you write a check and you give it to your friend. Well, your friend might take a few days or a few weeks or even a few months to cash that check. And until they do, the bank has absolutely no idea that you wrote that check. You know, you don't call them up and say, hey, I wrote this check, put it on my website, or, put it in my online banking. You don't do that. So when you go to your online banking, you might think you have more money than you actually do. And then whenever your friend goes and cashes that check, whenever they get their money, your funds are lower than what you thought they were, and therefore you run the risk of bouncing a check or overdrafting your account. So a check register is a really good idea to keep track of so that you know how much money you have and don't rely on what the bank says. All right, the checkbook. Once again, is a little bit of an outdated term, but when people used to write a lot of checks, they would actually carry a checkbook. And that's basically would be where all the checks were at. You can see kind of like a little clip art picture of one over here in the corner. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about writing a check. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, even though it's a little bit of an outdated thing. Some people still write checks, and there are some things that you have to write a check for. Like, for instance, some companies, whenever you pay your bill, you still have to write a check for it. So it's a good idea to know how to do it and what's involved. Before you write the check, there's going to be a few things that are on the check itself. You're going to have your name and your address. You're probably going to have the name of your bank. There's going to be some numbers down across the bottom, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those numbers mean. But basically, they make each one of your checks unique based on what the numbers are at the bottom. All right. Before any check is considered legal, so meaning that whoever you give it to, they can go and get their money. Before it's considered legal, it has to have 5 things on it. So we're going to go through the steps of putting these 5 things on that check. The first thing is it must include the date. So whenever you write a check, one of the very first things that you do is you fill out the date. Most people just simply write the date for whatever the current date is. There are some people that will write a date in the future so that that check does not become legal until that date. That's called post-dating a check, but that's not something most people do. Okay, the next thing that a check must have to be legal is you have to put on there who's receiving the check. So this would be the name of the person you're giving it to or the name of the company that you're sending it to. And you can see, like on this example here, the person that is receiving it is a place called Gas and Go, probably a gas station. Okay, the third thing that makes a check legal is you have to write the amount the check is for in numbers. And you usually put that in a tiny little box that's over on the right-hand side of the check. You will just simply write out, the amount with the decimal place and the cents. Now, you also have to put the amount in words. And this is where a lot of people kind of get hung up on, because it's easy to write out the numbers, but it's kind of difficult to write it out in words. But you write out that amount in words as well. And on a check, you write the dollar amount just in words, and then if there's any cents, you actually put that as a fraction. And since there's 100 pennies in a dollar, you write it as a fraction over 100. So on this example, the check was for $15.78. So we wrote 15 because that's how many dollars it is, and then we wrote 78 out of 100. You'll also notice that there is this line that's going from the check, from the words all the way to the end here. Most people do that for security purposes. They do not want anybody to be able to fill in extra words to make the check worth more money. So they usually, after they're done writing it, they'll put like a little squiggly line or just even a straight line right here to make sure nobody can do that. And if somebody did try to do that, and when the bank receives it, it'll look a little fishy. Now, I always get this question. What if this number written out in numbers and what if this number written out words are not the same? Is the check still legal? And the answer is yes, it is actually still legal. What the bank does is it compares the two numbers, and it will be for the value of the amount written out in words. So if these two numbers do not equal whatever you wrote out in words, that's how much the value of the check is. So you got to be super careful when you're writing out the amount in words, because maybe you meant to write $15 and over here you wrote $50. Well, all of a sudden you just made that check worth $35 extra, and you don't want to do that. So be super careful when you're writing out the amounts. Okay, and then the absolute final thing you have to do before you give the check to anybody is you must sign it. It has to be signed down here in the corner with one of the person's names that's up at the top. So since Sally Smith is up here, Sally Smith signs her name down here. If a check is not signed, it is not legal. All right, now I mentioned a little bit ago about the numbers that are across the bottom. There are 3 sets of numbers. The very first number is called the routing number. This is a number that is unique to every single bank in the United States. So every bank has their own routing number. The number next to it is the account number. So whenever you get a checking account, your bank is going to give you an account number, and that account number will show up on every single check you write. And then the third and final number is the number of the check. So when you write a check, it's numbered sequentially. Usually starts with like 100 or 101, and it just goes from there. The check number is always up here in the top right-hand corner, and then it's also down here at the bottom. So whenever a bank receives this, they can look at these 3 numbers and they can tell exactly where that check came from, because they can tell what bank it's from, what account it's from, and what number the check is. Okay, now let's talk about debit cards real quick, because this is really where most people in 2015 are spending their money. Debit cards are linked directly to your checking account, and you swipe them like you would a credit card. But instead of you owing somebody money later, it just comes directly out of your account. So the transaction is just like if you wrote a check, except it's done a little bit faster with your debit card. So it's really easy, it's convenient. For most transactions, you also have to type in a 4-digit PIN number with your debit card, but that's not always the case. I've had times where I've been at the gas station getting gas, or maybe I swipe my card at McDonald's or something and they don't require a PIN number. So it just kind of depends. Some pros and cons of debit cards. So like I said before, they are super convenient. You spend less time because you don't have to write the check out. You can use it for internet purchasing. You can, it allows you to carry less cash. However, there are some negative things about debit cards. Probably one of the biggest negative things is that it's really easy to swipe your debit card and forget that you spent that money. So you need to get into a habit of every time that you use your debit card that you quickly jot it down, or make sure that you remember that you spent that money. Because if you don't, you're going to have less money than you think, and you're going to run that risk of overdrafting your account and getting charged a fee. It is possible for thieves to get your debit card information. So like if there's a data breach, kind of like what Target and Home Depot had earlier, or if somebody steals your debit card out of your wallet or purse, or you accidentally lose it, they can use that debit card and spend money. Even if they don't have your PIN number, there's a lot of places that let them use it without it. So if you realize that you're missing your debit card, you need to report it immediately. Call your bank, make sure they understand that you've lost it. They will cancel that debit card and make sure that nobody can use it. All right, now let's say you are the person receiving a check. Before you can take it to the bank and get your money, you have to do this thing called endorsing. And endorsing just simply means that you sign the back of the check. There are 3 different ways to endorse a check. The first one is called a blank endorsement. This is when you just simply This is when you just simply sign your name. This is definitely the easiest way to do it. However, it's also the most risky, because as soon as you sign your name, that check is as good as cash. So imagine if you sign your name and then you lose that check. Whoever finds it, it doesn't matter who they are, can go and cash it because you've endorsed it. So it's better to not use a blank endorsement unless if you are already at the bank and you're getting ready to give the check to the teller. Now, let's say you want to endorse it, but you want to make sure nobody can steal that money. You can use this thing called a restrictive endorsement. This is basically where you sign it, but you just put the account number at the top. That means that that money can only go into that account number. Or you can use a thing called a special endorsement, where instead of you putting an account number, you put a person's name at the top. And then that person is the only other person that can cash that check. Okay, guys, that's the end of this video. Thank you for listening.